Testing the microphones, testing. Testing the microphones, testing.
Okay, I'll wait for the door to be shut. Thank you. Okay, it's 1:03. Sorry for the delay. We had a little technical difficulties. So I'll call today's meeting to order. First off, the Town of Rocky Mountain House wishes to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is Treaty 6 territory and a traditional meeting ground and home for many Indigenous peoples, including the Blackfoot, Cree, Saulteaux, Stoney, and Métis. I'm going to start with this with a motion, and I'll read it. Be it resolved that the Town of Rocky Mountain House lower the town flags to half-mast to honor the 215 children whose remains were discovered at the Kamloops Residential School. And further, that council start this council meeting with 215 seconds of silence for those children. So I will start our silence now. Oh, sorry, right, yeah. So are we all in favor of that? All in favor of that motion? Okay, and that's carried. So it is 1:04. We'll start our silence now. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Before I go any further, can we just confirm that we are indeed live streaming, that everything's going okay? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, we have an agenda in front of us. We'll move on to, does anybody have any additions or deletions from the agenda? Okay.
Your worship,
Gross.
our delegation unfortunately had to cancel today, so delete 4.1 and 6.1 from the agenda.
Thank you. Seeing nothing else, just looking for a motion to accept as amended, please. Councillor Fraser,
I so move.
all in favor of that motion? That's carried. So we'll move on to 5.1, to adopt the regular council meeting minutes from May 18th. Everybody's had a chance to read those. Does anybody have any concerns with the minutes? Okay, seeing none, just a motion to accept the minutes as presented. Councillor Brown, all in favor of that motion? That's carried. So we'll go on to number 7, old business, 7.1, prohibition of wildlife feeding bylaw. And I guess I'll turn that over to Ms. Hartling. Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. So if you recall, back on April 13th, we had Mr. Connor Noyes attend from Fish and Wildlife, just with regards to the feeding of wildlife within the town. It came to council on May 18th, and council had instructed us to bring back a bylaw. When I brought back the bylaw, there was concerns as to the wildlife attractants being in the bylaw, and to bring the bylaw back so it was more intentional feeding. That was the issue. So I've since gone back and I've revised the bylaw. So if you look to section 1 of the bylaw, this continues to outline the reason that the bylaw was created, and that's to reduce the risks associated with human wildlife contact. Under section 3, we did maintain the definition of peace officer so that that responsibility could be shared. The definition of wildlife attractant was removed entirely from the bylaw. And on section 4, under wildlife feeding, we made it very specific to the intentional feeding. So 4.1 reads, for reasons of public health and safety, it is forbidden to intentionally feed any wildlife within the boundaries of the town of Rocky Mountain House. 4.2 just references people tossing or leaving food out specifically for the purpose of feeding or baiting wild animals. We did leave in 4.3 about suspending bird feeders on a cable. However, it did remove the reference to seed accumulating because it does not take a lot of seed to bring a deer around. So I removed that section from there completely. And then there were some exceptions to the feeding, and that's for when people are baiting a wild animal for the purpose of catching it. The enforcement and penalties kind of stay in there, and I know that council had some concerns about maybe the amounts under the penalties, but I think because of the intention that they are possibly more applicable because of the intention behind it. Does council have any questions at all about the changes that were made or about the penalties?
So I just have 4.3, just to clarify, that the bird feeder is suspended on a cable or other device. So could that be some of these bird feeders you see on a pedestal? That's the same meaning, suspended in the air?
Yeah, well, it's the intent is so that it's not accessible,
Okay,
right? So whichever method that somebody would like to use, it's the intent is to get the bird feeder, kind of off the ground and away from where a deer would be able to access it.
okay.
Yeah.
And 4.2, do we have salt block anywhere?
No, I had removed that because I had listed it as an attractant. And I think anybody that's intentionally feeding, I see how you, the question is whether a salt block would be feeding them.
But
Or-
we shouldn't allow salt blocks.
No, we shouldn't, no. Yeah,
So
so I think because of the intentional feeding, I think putting a salt block out would be intentionally feeding
Okay.
deer, yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
everybody good with that? Does anybody have any other questions or comments on this? Yeah, no, other than that, I'm good with this. Okay, so we have, I'm just going back to my other screen. We have some a recommended alternative. Councillor Narang?
Yep, I'll make the first. Be it resolved that council give first reading of prohibition of wildlife feeding bylaw 2021/05, a bylaw to prohibit the feeding of wildlife in the town of Rocky Mountain House with 3 readings as presented.
I didn't even pick up on that, sorry. Thank you for that.
Do you want me to reread it? Just
Sure, please.
Sure,
No,
I will,
okay.
just so everybody can hear it when they rewatch this later. Be it resolved that council give first reading of prohibition of wildlife feeding bylaw 2021/05, a bylaw to prohibit the feeding of wildlife in the town of Rocky Mountain House with 3 readings as presented.
Okay. All in favor of that motion? And that's carried. Councillor Phillips?
I'd like to make a motion that council gives second reading of prohibition of wildlife feeding bylaw 2021/05.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of that motion? That's carried. Councillor Brown?
I'd like to make a motion that be it resolved that council give unanimous consent.
Mike?
I knew that. Just testing you. Be it resolved that council give unanimous consent to move to third reading of prohibition of wildlife feeding bylaw 2021/05.
Thank you. All in favor of that motion? And that's carried. Councillor Fraser?
Be it resolved that council give third and final reading to the prohibition of wildlife feeding bylaw 2021/05.
Thank you. All in favor of that motion? And that's carried. Thank you, Ms. Hartley.
Thank you, your worship.
Okay, so we'll move on to 8.1, RFD for the Proclamation Policy. Back over to you.
Yes, thank you, your worship. At the May 11th regular council meeting, council requested that administration investigate and prepare a policy to address proclamations. This report and attached policy have subsequently been prepared for council's consideration. There's no impact to the 2021 budget under the proposed policy, and there's no significant impact to staff as well. Under section 2 of the policy, the purpose is outlined as to establish a list of approved annual proclamations, as well as establishes criteria for any town proclamations. So basically, there's 2 lists. There's one that council can provide some direction today on who they would like to include on the proclamation list on an annual basis. And then the second one would be for new proclamations. There'd be a process for them to go through to apply to have proclamations brought to council. Under section 4, this section just explains that proclamations that are listed on Schedule B are not required to apply for a proclamation, as they've already gone through that process and council's approved them on the list. It also lists criteria. Section 5 describes the process for application, providing council with the discretion to revise the wording of any proclamation Also, it's noted that advertising and other costs related to the event are the responsibility of the applicant. Section 5.7 also allows for council to amend Schedule B, the list of proclamations by resolution, rather than bringing back the proclamations, the whole policy back to council. So by resolution, you'd be able to add some, proclamation to the list. And I did want to go through with council. I don't know if you have any questions with regards to the policy. So there's two things, just if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those questions. But then I'd also like to go through the proclamations list with council so we can determine which ones to keep on the list.
Okay. Does anybody have any comments? No comments?
No comments?
No comments? Okay, so I do.
Okay.
Sorry. So I like the fact that we are suggesting that all proclamation requests need to be submitted 4 weeks prior, because this allows council then the time to research the group. I was just trying to think, could all proclamations be added to a town council, like a town calendar for the whole year?
That could be done. It would probably have to be done. When I was doing the research for it, I found there was inconsistencies in the dates. So the dates change. And I think the other thing, because I was having trouble finding some of the proclamations from previous years in 2021. And so whether those associations make the call to look for proclamations at a later time, I'm not sure, but it was difficult finding the dates and finding consistencies as well. So
I just thought if we had like an ongoing calendar year after year and then recognize it each month, because I'd hate to lose the intent of the proclamation by just having it there and never discussing the actual proclamation. Councillor Narang?
Yeah, that was sort of why I think we talked about having this in place, was that so it could be an ongoing thing, whether it's something that we have a calendar publicly or if it's an internal calendar that we know in this month, these are the things that we're going to be talking about. And,
Acknowledge them at the beginning of the month or something.
Yeah.
Your worship, just to address that, I think what might be a good process is that we have a list of proclamations that they're on the list, and that maybe 2 weeks prior to the beginning of each month, we do a quick review to see which proclamations are coming up in the next month, so that we're not missing it and making sure we're doing it at least 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time, so we can update the list accordingly. I know that some of the organizations that I saw, it is kind of consistent, but others were not consistent.
So other municipalities, have you researched other municipalities?
Yeah, so the proclamation policies that I did research, all of the ones that I looked at they didn't have like an approved list. They had the proclamation policy, which had the application 4 weeks prior.
Okay. Councillor Fraser?
Is there any reason we shouldn't add all of the available proclamations? Like, are there ones that people don't want on there?
Like, what do you mean?
Well, because we are discussing which proclamations we would like to put on the pre-approved list. So we've got the previous one. So this one says 2021, and those are the ones that have been proclaimed. And it says list of proclamations available. So are we deciding which of that big list is going to be pre-approved, or are there ones that we're not going to be proclaiming?
This almost feels muddier than just having them come in. I don't know. No? Because what if we are missing some?
It leaves it open, so we have the list.
Okay,
But then people can still come in and request a proclamation, and council could make the resolution for the proclamation, and then they could make a second resolution to add them to the list. So that, as time goes on, we would have a longer list of different proclamations out there. And I think the responsibility would fall on administration to ensure that we have the proper dates for the upcoming year. And, whether that means making a phone call to an organization to get what the actual date is, because I'm sure that the dates actually might not be publicly available because it's, in their plans for the year to have it on a certain date, but it's easy enough for administration to follow up with the organization to get a date for that year, for the next calendar year.
yeah, I guess I'm kind of confused. It seems like it's more in depth than, but Councillor Phillips?
I like the fact, I'm just going to use National Volunteer Week as an example. I mean, that happens every year. We proclaim it every year. I like having a policy in place where that is just the standard now. That's proclaimed already. And then when we do have additional requests, we can just do them as an individual basis as they come in. But there's definitely, this list is a good comprehensive list of good proclamations that there's no reason not to have this as our list.
Councillor Narang?
Yeah, I mean, while I know that dates tend to change, I don't think the months change. Hey, Renee? The months generally stay the same?
Yeah, I think it's more the date.
Right.
Because of it, like it's the first Monday or
Yeah.
whatever.
So then at least we'll be
whatever
able to
month.
plan for this.
Yes, yeah, and if we have the list, we can confirm the dates. We can do it, say, that might be a task in December to confirm the dates for the proclamations for the next year. And having that portion in the policy where if we do get, like we have another one on the agenda later in the agenda for a proclamation, if that's something that council would like to add to the list, they can approve the policy, then they can approve the declaration and make another resolution to add that one to the list of proclamations, so that eventually we'll have an exhaustive list of proclamations and stuff that count. And the other option is that, or the other thing is that having the list, that's something that council can review every couple of years to see if maybe some of them are no longer running, or things change all the time. But having the running list is, I think, helpful in terms of having these proclamations ready for council.
Councillor Fraser?
I think that the purpose of doing a proclamation as a council is so we can make the public aware and communicate that to the public, and possibly look at doing events or any action associated with that specific event. For example, Rural Health Week, it would have been a good time if we were doing something on rural health. There's a letter writing campaign. I feel like we're always behind when these weeks come up. And if we had a list ahead of time and we knew what was going on, then maybe we could focus on what's going on, what's being offered by other levels of government, what programs are involved. And it's not just a proclamation, it's a proclamation that helps communicate what's going on and the different advocacy for the different issues. So I like the pre-approved list because I think it means that we will miss fewer of them.
So my one last question then, do you see this as being more labor intensive for admin?
Your worship, no, I don't. I think that once we've got the list established, it's just a matter of confirming some of the dates, which can be done, I think, for some of them online. In other cases, it's a quick phone call to the organization. Probably the provincial head would be able to confirm dates. And then, I think the nice thing about it is because it does go into the town's calendar. And so that information can get put on the town's calendar much earlier, which I think is beneficial to the promotion of any events that are related to it. So.
Okay. Councillor Phillips?
Yeah, I echo Councillor Fraser's comments. a lot of times we're getting the proclamation request literally days before or a week before the actual event. And there's no way to really do anything or be proactive and let the public know about it. If we have a list, then the public will know about it from our website, and we can choose or not choose to actively participate in something. But to get a proclamation request and have it in effect the next day, it seems to be just lip service sometimes. So I would like to have this list, and then we can move forward.
And if you don't feel it's an extra huge amount of admin, then Mr. Crows?
Yeah, Your Worship, so just for clarification to administration, I mean, if council's considering, everything on this list, council's got to be aware this is by no means a comprehensive list. Right? I mean, for example, there's Recreation and Parks Week. There's also a Public Works Week. There's also an Economic Development Week, and it goes on and on. So, which we would just keep adding to this list, and then all of a sudden the proclamations lose value. Yeah.
That's my fear.
So I guess our anticipation as administration is that council would pick certain proclamations that are very representative of our community, or what we recognize in our community and we want to acknowledge, versus like a Public Works Week. No offense to our crew, because they're great, but all of our crew, all our staff are great, but that's more internal, and we recognize it internally. But to me, a proclamation should be something that council's very proud of occurs and happens in our community, and it has meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, I agree. Councillor Narang?
I'm just wondering, because also what's not on this list is it's National Indigenous History Month is June, and that would be something I think that our whole community would benefit from celebrating for the whole month. But I wonder if it would be worth the time to have like even a separate meeting where we go through each month and find out exactly for like a 12-month period what we as council think is something that would be relevant, like that maybe we don't have that much time in a council meeting, but maybe to go through what's available and what's meaningful for our community. Because I think that's a good point, is rather than proclaiming everything and going along with everything, might be something like a workshop or something that we can really put some concerted time into deciding what's important to our community.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. Councillor Brown?
And I just want to throw my support behind that suggestion as well.
Okay, so what would council's wish be then today? Do we want to accept the proclamation policy, but then add that we will have a meeting or a workshop to determine which proclamations would be on the list?
Yeah, Your Worship, so I'd postpone the passing of the policy.
Okay.
Because the list is part of the policy.
Okay.
And then just establish a
Right.
date for a committee meeting to review the proclamations.
Okay. Yeah, because I, for example, had a request this year for Dental Hygienist Week as well, and I see that's not on the list. So do we put a call out then to the public to say, to the nonprofits, right? Or anybody, can you see a benefit of having a certain group or organization be on this list? Just to kind of create that awareness, and then we will go through them. Because yeah, if we're proclaiming every day and every month, that just really will lose, I think, the value of that. Everybody's important, so I just don't want to lose the importance. Okay, so just a motion then to move this to a later date.
Yeah, Your Worship, unless council wants to select a date right now for a meeting, but you're also asking us to engage the public on proclamation. So maybe that's first, and then we can come back to council for a date.
Sure, that sounds good. Does that, to everybody else, does that work? Okay. So we just need a motion then to bring this back to a later date.
So, yeah, Your Worship, that council postpone the proclamation policy and instruct administration to seek input from nonprofit groups, public,
Sure.
or
I think if we just put it on our website and our Facebook page and perhaps, I don't know where else, we would do that.
so just public engagement.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, somebody want to make that motion?
I will.
Councillor Narang? Any other questions or comments on that? Okay, all in favor of the motion? That's carried. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. So we'll move on to 8.2, the ice allocation policy.
Good afternoon,
Good afternoon,
Your
Mr.
Worship and
Ament.
Council. Before you today to finally bring the ice allocation policy to you. We've been in the process of reviewing all policies throughout the organization, and the ice allocation policy was identified as needing a review and an update. We actually started the process last year, but then when COVID kicked in, and it was a bit of a scramble to see what kind of season was going to have. But we've had the opportunity to review the policy. We've researched other communities' policies. We did have an opportunity to present the draft policy to all of our ice users. We submitted to them electronically for their review independently and provide us with comments and feedback. And then we did review it again at the ice allocation or ice users meeting in earlier in May. And my understanding is that that meeting went very well, very few comments and stuff. So we're, the policy basically will serve as a guide for the ice allocation process at the arena, ensures the responsible management and allocation of facility time that is equitable, reasonable, and fair, ensures optimum use and programming, minimize the risk and operational issues, and provides fiscally responsible and financial sustainable operations. And so the difference between the existing policy and the new one, we've updated some of the definitions that are in the policy. Ice user allocation meetings are identified, contracts and conditions, insurance requirements, damage deposits, fees, and address sort of the cancellation procedures. So unless there's any specific questions that council may have, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. I just had one quick one, and then it was with the allocation priorities. Is this a new list?
It's an updated list, yes, because
Okay.
the allocation policy previously did not include the junior Bs.
Okay,
And so we've had a chance to look at that and factor in basically when we're setting that, some of the priorities are based on league requirements
okay,
as to the timing of when they set their schedules. They have to have certain things put in place prior.
Okay.
So I know usually at our season ending ice user meeting, which would have happened, which was the May meeting, review of last year and giving people a heads up of what's coming in the new year and gives them an opportunity to look at that. And then typically it's our ice user meeting in July or early August where we actually sit down and hammer out what's the template look for ice allocation for the upcoming season. We revisit all the special events and tournaments and those types of things, and then have the template set for the year. It's mostly the changes to the weekday schedule doesn't change much because it's practices. It's where the challenge for allocation is on the weekends when games are assigned, and depending on when the leagues get their schedules back to us, it sometimes makes it a little challenging certain organizations need to present to their league X number of times for each team, and we're waiting on that. But other organizations get together in September and like to set their schedule for the entire year. So there's that nuance and challenge that we face every year. But at the same time, this does provide our staff with the process. Ultimately we sit down with the groups and we try to work out what's fair and go from there. But if there is conflict or something that we have in policy, here's the direction that's been approved by council.
Good, okay, thanks. Councillor Phillips?
I just have a question regarding priority number 4, the minor hockey league games. Rec hockey and minor hockey, they're both Alberta sanctioned now, correct?
The rec hockey program was they were insured under Hockey Alberta.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily a sanctioned league. That's the
Okay.
distinction. You know, minor hockey and rec hockey are both classified as youth organizations, but the distinction between the sanction is that the minor hockey participates in the leagues, they're sanctioned leagues that have much more stringent rules on scheduling
Okay.
than perhaps the rec hockey program does.
I just know there was a lot of conflict between minor hockey and rec hockey with scheduling, and I'm wondering does this make them on a level playing field? Is that what this policy does?
I think it sets the process for the discussion that we have when we're allocating the ice times.
Does anybody have any other questions? No? Okay. What are council's wishes? Councillor Brown?
If there's no further discussion, I would make the motion that be it resolved that council approve the ice allocation policy 010/2021 as presented.
Okay. All in favor of that motion? That's carried. Thanks, Mr. Ament.
Thank you.
So moving on to 9.1, Town of High River proposed Alberta coal policy. Okay. My turn. Is that Mr. Kraus?
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is a letter from High River requesting council to follow their initiative, putting forward their own Alberta coal restriction policy, which is specified no further coal exploration or development will be permitted on the eastern slopes of Alberta. Existing coal mining operations in the Hinton Grand Cache areas would be permitted to retire, in the reclamation of lands. It's actually a policy being put forward that they wish to put forward toward the Coal Policy Committee in July, and it's basically for the prohibiting coal mines.
So our letter that we sent is basically asking for more public consultations. And so that's the survey, that's what's happening right now. And I'm under the understanding that they're going to be having more coal communication. Does anybody know where we're at with that?
Your Worship, no, I would have to follow up with the province of where they're at in their process. But this is to lobby the coal committee to basically prohibit the coal
Prohibit any
mines
kind of coal mining. Okay,
on the eastern slopes.
okay. Councillor Phillips?
I definitely am not in favor of no coal policy, period. I think, can the government do a better job? Can they do a better job of talking to the public? Yes, for sure. I definitely would not be in favor of supporting a zero coal initiative in the province of Alberta.
Councillor Fraser?
No, just to be clear, it's not zero coal in the province of Alberta. It's just on the eastern slopes, which were protected areas until they rescinded it. So it's not zero coal. It's just zero coal on the eastern slopes.
Yeah, that's correct. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I think our actions we've taken to date are sufficient to this point.
Councillor Narang?
I agree with Councillor Brown. I think that this is sort of, I relate it back to our COVID conversations about where our knowledge kind of begins and ends and what we have within our wheelhouse. And I'm happy with what we've done so far in requesting greater public discourse around coal policies, because that's really what the issue has been, is that people want more information and they want more consultation, and they just want to know that everything is happening with everybody's eyes kind of wide open and all of the information that we need to make good choices. So I'm content with what we have asked of the government to date.
And that's the way I lean as well. So, should we send a letter back to High River, or explaining that we've already sent a letter to the government, or that we don't want to take any more action, or perhaps Councillor Fraser?
Since they are sending this recommendation to the Committee on Coal, perhaps we should send our letter to that we had written to the Committee on Coal, because I think that we outlined some concerns that do need to be addressed. And I do think the people on that committee are going to be making decisions, and they should have all of our info. So I'm wondering if, instead of signing on to this initiative, we send our concerns directly to that committee as well.
So just send the same letter then, possibly, and address it to this committee, the Coal Committee. Yeah. And then that way it just refreshes everybody's memory that we've done that already. Okay, so then we need a motion to send the letter that we did send to Minister Savage to the Coal Policy Group. The Alberta Coal Policy Group, is that what they're called? Does that motion sound okay there, Renee? You got it written down?
Do you want me
Yeah,
to read it
sure.
back? Okay. Be it resolved that council thank the town of High River for their request, and send the same letter that was sent to Minister Savage to the Alberta Coal Policy Group.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll make that motion. All in favor of that motion? And that's carried. Just to have it. Put my hand up, even though I make that. Jeez. Okay. So moving on to 9.2. ARPA, June is Recreation and Parks Month proclamation, or a proclamation for Recreation and Parks Month. So we have another proclamation. Is it possible just to promote June as Parks and Rec Month on our social media instead of a proclamation, or should we do a proclamation for the whole month? Mr. Ament?
Mayor and council, yes, I think I had forwarded this because I get the emails from the RPA on a regular basis. It's just a reminder that June is Parks and Recreation Month. I don't know that it requires a proclamation, other than the fact that we just know it's there and we promote it along
Good.
with all of our other activities.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Narang?
Yeah, and I think that Mr. Kraus commented about like things like we have Public Works Month and things like that, and it's sort of like all of our departments are equally important. And we do have, and I think this would be something that would be brought back to the meeting that we talked about when we were discussing, because there's other things that were taking place in each month that maybe we want, that represents the community as a whole a bit better. So, but I think internally, each department can celebrate and promote and do that.
Councillor Phillips?
And just kind of skipping back and going back to the policy that we were looking at, is maybe we can have proclamation list and maybe an awareness list. Maybe those are two separate things. And then this could maybe be on an awareness list as opposed to a proclamation list.
So is it suitable then just to promote June as Recreation Month on our social media? Do you think that would be suitable, Mr. Ament?
I believe that certainly will hit the mark.
Okay. So thank you. So just a motion then to, basically it was like what we did for Early Educators Day on that 2 Fridays ago. We'll just put it out on our social media feed So who would like to make that motion? Councillor Phillips?
I will make that motion.
Jed, do you want to?
I'll make the motion that we promote June as Parks and Recreation Month on our social media sites.
Everybody clear on that motion? All in favor of that motion? And that's carried. Thank you. So moving on to 9.3, weed inspector appointments. This is just every year we
Yeah.
do this.
It is, your worship. So it's one of the shared services we do with Clearwater County. For example, we clean streets in their hamlets and flush sewers in their hamlets. And then in return, they provide us with additional services also. And this is just one of them. So under the Weed Controlled Act, each municipality is required to have weed inspectors. And the county generally hires about 5 or 6 per year. Because obviously it's more of a significant issue for them in the farming community. And they just come through town once in a while and just check for noxious weeds in our property. So if council can appoint these 5 individuals as our weed inspectors also, then we're set to go.
Okay. It's pretty straightforward to me. And public can phone these weed inspectors as well if they have a concern, right, with the weed in town?
Yeah, your worship, they would phone our engineering operations
Okay.
department, and then they would contact these individuals to come out and take a look.
Okay, that's good. Thanks. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, just if there's no further discussion, I'd like to propose that council approve the list of weed inspector appointments for the 2021 season as provided.
You've got that, Renee? We're good? Okay. Everybody clear on that motion? All in favor? And that's carried. So invitation to Bowdoin Days Parade, July 17th. I can attend. This will be the first one in a long time, so hopefully it goes ahead. So I guess I just need to book the car. So I guess we just need a motion that I will attend the Bowdoin Days Parade. Councillor Narang?
Yeah.
Okay. All in favor of that motion? Carried. Thanks. All right, just need a motion to accept 10.1 to 10.5 as correspondence for information. Councillor Fraser? Okay, all in favor of that motion? Carried. Moving on to 11.1. Does anybody have any questions for my written report? No? Okay, just a motion to accept my report, please. Thanks.
I'll
Councillor
make that motion.
Phillips? All in favor of that motion? Carried. Does anybody have any questions on the written councillors' reports? Okay, I'll make a motion to accept the councillor reports as written. All in favor? That's carried. We have the action list. Does anybody see anything that they want to discuss on the action list or have questions? Councillor Fraser?
When was the meeting with Roar?
It went positive. Yeah, I'll bring something back on June 8th.
Thank you so much.
Okay, seeing no other questions on the action list, just a motion to accept the action list as presented. Councillor Brown, all in favor of that motion? Carried. Administrative inquiries. I have one. It's about the Truth and Reconciliation Report. There are 94 calls to action on that report, and this past few days has brought to light that that there needs to be more attention to those calls to action. So I'm just wondering if we could bring the Truth and Reconciliation Report, or at least the calls to action, back for council discussion.
Yes, your worship, we can bring it back. Council's preference, June 8th or June 15th, but we'll bring it back as correspondence for action for discussion. So
Okay.
does council have a preferred date?
You know what, we can do the 15th. It works for me. Councillor Narang?
Could we have the report sent to us via email so that we can review it beforehand? Okay.
Okay. Councillor Fraser?
And I'm not sure if this will be discussed there or if it's possible to send it sooner. I know that several levels of municipalities and groups are specifically focusing on call to action 71 to 76 regarding the archaeological excavation and the forensic identification and sending children home. And we had more residential schools in Alberta than I think any other province. And I think that there needs to be a call to the federal government to get this done. So I don't know if that needs to be a letter or if that would fall under when we go over the entire report, but it's really large, and specifically the 71 to 76, I think are incredibly important.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brown?
I agree with Councillor Fraser. I'm just not sure, perhaps you may know, Councillor Fraser, whether that includes expectation to do an archaeological investigation for further burial sites at other residential schools.
Sorry, yes, that's what it was, to go to the residential schools and to find the unmarked graveyards and to do their best to find out who these children were and get them home.
Prime Minister Trudeau did say in his address at FCM this morning that there is definitely money and this is definitely a priority. I also know that in one of those recommendations, they're asking for a call to have a National Day of Mourning as well in there. So I think it's pertinent that we look at all of the recommendations and make, send whichever letters that we feel that we need to send to the proper government levels of government. So is everybody okay? Should we move it up to the 8th then, or should we leave it for the 15th?
I think leave it at 15th.
And that gives us more time to read it because it's a big report.
It's huge.
Okay. All right. So I guess admin you're good with all of that then? Okay. Any other admin inquiries? No. Any notices of motion? Oh, we have Councillor Fraser, incorporation of food security into town's tree planting policy.
All right, so I know I've been contacted a few times, and I know it's kind of shown up in discussions over the years about food security and food security in town and what happens, for the people who aren't able to purchase food, and what happens if the supply lines are interrupted like they were last spring. So some of the discussion about food security, we've already looked at changing some of the LUB rules around front lawns so people can plant food items. But I was wondering if, as a town, in our policy, we wanted to perhaps offer the option of including food and fruit trees in our regular planting and available for the memorial tree planting. The other suggestion was that perhaps unplaqued memorials could be done for smaller items, like Saskatoon berry bush along the walking path, or a blackberry bush along the walking path, something that's wild that won't need to be maintained. People may not have $1,000 to spend on a tree, but they might be able to start adding to that natural food security in a way that is meaningful, but also helps the town.
Councillor Phillips?
I agree with the intent of what Councillor Fraser is talking about. My concern is we already had a talk about attracting wildlife into the town, and would those bushes potentially attract deer and other kind of wildlife onto the walking trails or Main Street? That would be my only concern, is that, yes, the intent, I get that we should do something, but I don't know if that's going to attract wildlife onto Main Street or the walking path.
Councillor Narang?
We kind of talked about that at the last meeting regarding or not the last meeting, well, maybe, but the attractant and whatnot. And I think that's why we asked admin to change the policy around wildlife feeding and putting the intent in there. So I think that we've addressed that issue in the wildlife feeding policy by making it an intentional act. And I think we talked about adjusting that policy just so that we could have this conversation about having food-based trees and bushes planted.
Councillor Fraser and then Councillor Phillips.
Well, and I do know that we have naturally in some of the areas in town, there are Saskatoon bushes, and I know that that was one of the concerns when we were looking at Centennial Park, was that there are Saskatoon berry bushes that people go and collect their berries every year. So it's well known that those Saskatoon bushes are there. People go and clear them every year, and I don't think we have a wildlife problem in that area. So I think perhaps a whole apple orchard might be a problem, but berry bushes here and there, I think would provide more benefit than they would be an attractant.
I think the deer are everywhere in this town. There is no place that's not, Councillor Phillips?
And by planting an apple tree or a bush, we're not intentionally attracting wildlife, but we could accidentally be attracting wildlife. I would think it would be something that we would have to maybe go further and check with Alberta Parks and say, hey, is this a good idea? If this is a good idea, then go ahead and do it. Maybe if it's going to attract wildlife, we should find a different venue or a different place or something that would work better. And yes, the deer are all over town. We just don't want to attract more if we don't have to.
Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I think sometimes when we have these conversations, we're focusing too much on trees and bushes. There are other food sources that may not be the attractant problem that trees and bushes are. I seem to recall several years ago, the town actually had planted vegetables and that in the flower beds. So I think maybe we could kind of focus in that direction as opposed to going out and planting trees, which may seem counter to our policy.
Okay. Councillor Fraser?
I am 100% happy putting vegetables in our planters. It was one of those kind of no-goes originally when I brought it up because there was concern about contamination. But if that's an easier direction, if that's easier to manage, then I have no problem with whatever path we need to take so that there's some food security for people who might need it. I'm okay with that.
We also have the community gardens. And I'm just wondering how many fruit trees are down there. So fruit trees, and they have garden plots, and it might be good to have a conversation with the people that are organizing the community gardens to see, are the plots full, and perhaps we can help promote the community gardens. Councillor Phillips?
And perhaps this is something we can incorporate into an educational component of having a garden in your backyard. I know that doesn't work for people in apartments, but if you are in a house or anything like that does have a yard, maybe an educational component of this is how you can, grow your own food or your own vegetables for those that don't know how to do that.
Councillor Brown?
And the other thing we have talked about briefly in the past is investigating further programs for food security with restaurants and supermarkets.
Isn't FCSS doing a program where they are doing, I think that's more wild foraging. Am I correct on that?
my understanding the FCSS has purchased a couple of plots in the community garden area that they assist those people in need with providing garden spots. And I think they do sort of an educational program around that as well.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Narang?
Actually, yeah, talking about FCSS, just kind of, there are organizations in town offering programs related to food security. There's a number of them. So I'm wondering if planting of fruit trees and whatnot would even impact the food security portion of it, or if it's more in the optics of it all, because we do have a number of organizations that are already addressing this. So it might be about educating people about what is out there and what is actually going on. And maybe we don't need to be planting food trees.
Yep, go ahead, Mr. Ament.
Just following that line of thought, I mean, you could put that, I know there's probably lots of people with fruit trees in their yards that they can't harvest all the fruit. And it's a matter of putting that out there. I've got apples that if you want, come and back to your heart's delight, right? As long as you make an apple pie for me.
Yeah, okay, we'll keep you in mind. I think isn't that called gleaming? Do you know? Gleaming? Yeah, I believe it's called gleaming. Yeah, where you put that on Facebook, it's called gleaming. It's basically come and pick our trees. So I think it's just the education. Maybe there is a local food Facebook page, you know, and I know I see in the harvesting time, you know, our short season, but I've seen people advertising their raspberries that are ready, their crab apples, their apples.
They put baskets at the end of their
Yeah.
driveway, their zucchinis and whatnot, so maybe, yeah.
Just promoting that if you have fruit that, you know, is going to waste, please, you know, put it out there and make sure it gets used. It also helps keep the deer away and the bears to get the fruit off the trees, right? So, okay, so where are we going with your notice of motion then, Councillor Fraser?
Well, it kind of seems like there's a few different levels to this. So perhaps the fit isn't with the tree planting policy, but the fit is with maybe reaching out to some of those groups that are focusing on food security and doing that. And I guess maybe on a larger level, reaching out to maybe the larger producers like restaurants and supermarkets and saying, you know, are there some programs that we could partner them up with to deal with it kind of on the commercial end of things? Because I agree that an apple tree, you know, only makes so many apples. Just that we're starting to think about it and look at solutions to deal with both food waste and food scarcity.
So just to clarify, when you say we, who do you mean? Like who specifically would you see as we doing this?
I guess we as the town reaching out to basically see what programs exist and helping promote what programs exist. And then if there is something that is a larger program, I know there's several supermarket programs that are kind of half running in different, maybe partner them up with some of the larger producers. Maybe more of an advocacy role for us and kind of matchmaking with the different sectors.
I believe the food bank is doing something like that with some of the grocery stores, but I think we should, some of these nonprofits and organizations are already doing this.
Yeah, and absolutely. So I'd like to find out what they're doing and then be able to promote that and help them and see if there's gaps.
Councillor Narang?
Yeah, I think even something along the lines on our website, having a food security tab on the website, so you can click on it and see all the different areas and organizations and programs that are within town. It just shows that we have an understanding and a priority around food security. It doesn't necessarily create more work, but people would know that this is where you can find the help that you need if it's something that you need, I guess. So just linking people, making them aware of what's in the community.
Okay, Councillor Phillips?
That very, very similar to what I was just going to say. This seems to be more of an educational component as opposed to going out and planting trees and shrubs. I do like the idea of connecting neighbors with apple trees, fruit bushes. If there was some way to make that available to people that are in need, I think that would go a long ways, because there are a lot of trees in this town that the person in that lot cannot use all of the apples, and they just go to waste. So it'd be nice to be able to connect those two people together.
I see this as also being a food waste, initiative and waste diversion. So it could be a win-win, but I just don't know who are we tasking with this? Mr. Kraus?
So your worship, if I'm hearing council correctly, council actually has two considerations of motions here. So the one is to deal with Councillor Fraser's notice of motion. If council wants us to add fruit trees to our 2 tree programs already, which is still a viable option. And then the second one would be that administration bring back a report on food security programs that are available in town, and then maybe council can move forward from there if it's promotion or more involvement or what it is. But it would be bringing back report just to let council aware of all the programs in town right now. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Okay, Councillor Fraser?
So I guess if what I'm hearing is that the interest is more to the food security, food waste, working with the nonprofits versus doing our own tree planting, I'll rescind my motion or notice of motion. Or
Your worship, Councillor Fraser, that's up to you. I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea to include fruit trees into our memorial tree program. It just gives our citizens more options, and then also benefits your food security initiative. So
I guess, yeah, that would still be an option for them, and it would not be. Okay. All right, well then I will make the motion that we incorporate appropriate fruit trees into the town's tree planting policy and memorial tree program.
Okay, everybody clear on that motion? Okay, all in favor of that motion? That's carried. Okay, Councillor Narang?
Can I make a motion now regarding the research? Okay, so then I would also then make a motion to direct administration to research available food security options in our community to bring back for a future. Do I need a date? Sure. Well, June 15th is a big one because we're doing the TRC then too. Or will that work? Yeah, okay.
Say a future meeting, that way they're not.
Not be holding, but June 15th is fine with me, if it's fine with you, Dean.
Okay. Everybody clear on that motion? No, no other.
Read back on that.
Okay.
Just a motion to direct administration to bring back to present to council all of the available food security programs in Rocky Mountain House.
Okay, good. All in favor of that motion? That's carried. Okay. That was it. So it is 2:11. I'll call a 5-minute break.